Neha and Alexis, for being here. We're going to spend the next little bit talking about the future of money, I think, is our remit. But to do that, to help contextualize that, I want to talk a little bit about the present first, because I think it may inform the future in important ways. Specifically, when we talk about cryptocurrency, obviously it's been in a little bit of a tailspin lately. And we have, Alexis, you early this year had Bitcoin 20,000. Curious if you're sticking to that at this point. And Neha, you've been more bullish about it. But I guess what I wonder is, A, is the bubble bursting right now? But then also, what will that mean? And is it maybe there an opportunity baked within that, even if it is kind of imploding?
Well, you're referring to that Fortune article, which in the article, in my defense, I did say these kinds of predictions are just going to bite me in the ass later.
Sure.
So as someone who's been bitten in the ass by that prediction, I do still think that we're long crypto at Initialize. I mean, we were the first investors in Coinbase, so we've been first seed investors, so we've been in this for a while. But I try not to get too hung up on the currency fluctuations, especially right now. I actually think this is a great time because it's sort of scattered all of the charlatans and all of the scenesters and the sort of most greedy players. And the folks that we're meeting with today who are pitching us about their blockchain-based ideas, they're builders, they're makers, or they're biddlers, if you know the crypto jargon. And I think that crypto winter is going to be an overall great thing because it's forcing people to really focus on building as opposed to just wild currency speculation.
Well, and hey, that building things with the blockchain is sort of your focus right now, right?
Absolutely. I mean, echoing that, maybe even taking it a step further, the most common question I get is, hey, which crypto asset should I buy, right? My Uber driver, and I the first thing I say is, like, I'm a terrible investor. I work in academia, don't ask me what to invest in. I'm not going to give you a very good answer. But also, I have, at this point in time, it's gotten all of this attention about being an asset, right? Being an investment vehicle, being speculation. In some ways, that's been good because it draws people into the space, but in other ways, it's been extraordinarily harmful, and I think really distracting people from what's important, which is the technology. This is a really cool technology, and we're going to build really amazing things with it, and it's not just about getting rich really fast.
Or it could be about getting rich a little slower. So in terms of, when you say it's about building things, what I'm curious about is, I think, because it's not clear right now, at least to me, how far we really are in blockchain's evolution necessarily. And by that I mean, with the internet, you saw the early days of ARPANET up into, say, we'll jump ahead in time to the collapse of the tech industry in the late 90s, to today, where we sort of rebuilt the web from there. Where do you guys see the blockchain equivalent there? Where are we in terms of, if you were to say, how far along in that development are we?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people like to say we're in the 90s, and it's also become kind of cool to, like, go back further than anybody else. There's only so far back you can go. But we legitimately think that, pre-car, we legitimately think we're in maybe like late 70s, early 80s. And the reason I say that is because we don't have TCP yet. We don't have that protocol. We don't have that protocol that kind of everybody's agreed on. We have a whole bunch of different competing protocols, and they're fighting it out, which is super exciting. But I think it means that it's really difficult to build on top of what are essentially shifting sands. So it's really great. We think a lot about the internet. MIT has been pretty critical to the development of the internet. We have the inventor of the web. We have the inventor of TCP/IP. The inventor of Ethernet, and I'm really excited to help the space develop.
Yeah, and I mean, you're absolutely right, Neha. I mean, there is, I think, because I'm looking at it through the lens of many of the founders that we meet and the investing we do, I do have that rose-tinted look on things. It was my partner, Gary, who had framed it as we're sort of pre-Netscape from the standpoint of we're looking for that browser experience. Things like DApps or DApps are right now a really arduous process to use for a normal user, and we need, and we've seen some interesting sort of beginnings there to make that user experience, that UI better. And so from a product standpoint, We feel like we are a year or two away for some really, really bold, great kind of UI, UX improvements from a product standpoint that will bring more users into the mix. And because it's built on blockchain in a way that doesn't intimidate and doesn't seem too daunting.
But does blockchain at this point, and again, you mentioned a lot of the hustlers and grifters and scammy element has sort of shaken out. A lot of that is shaken out, but that's also, at this point, how a lot of people think of it, or that's how they relate to it, or they lost a lot of money because they invested in Litecoin because they thought it was going to keep going up forever. So even with an easier UI, UX, what are some of the use cases that are going to bring people back into it and be interested in it? You mentioned you had seen a couple of glimmers of things that seem promising. Neha, I know, again, you spend so much time in this area. Like, what seems like a promising thing that's going to bring people back if they were scared away either by the dropping prices or they got burned by an ICO?
I think we have examples right now of things like digital goods. There's probably a lot of Fortnite players out here. No? A couple? Okay, maybe your kids play it. Very popular. It's a big deal. And I think we have this notion of these non-fungible assets that if any of you grew up playing Magic the Gathering, you knew the value of a Black Lotus card.
We're back in the 90s.
Yes. And so, sorry, I'm always trying to bring it back to that 90s.
Yeah.
And so I think there's infrastructure that's being built right now to try to facilitate these marketplaces as well as these ecosystems where and it's a big if, you can get people to buy in, not to just own a CryptoKitty and kind of stare at it, but to actually be playing a game and have the assets of that game be tradable and immutable. Like that's a special novel thing that's fitting into a mold that already exists in most users' behavior. And so it's not a great leap, it's a step, but that has huge implications.
Yeah, it's also a very different data architecture. I worked in databases and distributed systems, and this data architecture is about interoperability. It's about different organizations all building on the same standard. And so that's where you get things like these digital assets that can be moved across games, right? That the person who owns them really owns. And I think that's really powerful. And I think, a lot is going to develop on top of that.
Can we, and looking beyond games too, because obviously there are probably more urgent use cases, right, than cryptocurrency, than CryptoKitties 2.0. There's what are the implications too for people who maybe don't have a centralized banking system they can trust, and how long will it take for this to be, to whatever extent it's not already, a viable sort of alternative? When are the shifting sands going to sort of turn to cement and we can start actually building something for those people?
Yeah, a lot of people ask me, like, what's real, right? Yeah. What is the real use case? And it's honestly, it's a little bit boring. It's cross-border payments, things like cross-border payments, things where people don't have access to traditional digital financial services, things like Bitcoin actually fulfill a real need. And I think that as an industry, we've gotten really excited and kind of want to move on to the next latest and greatest, but even that in itself is very powerful.
Yeah, and we had a couple of our partners go down to, I think it was ETH Buenos Aires, and to see the culture around crypto building outside of the US is really heartening, I think, in a lot of ways, because you can see the sort of lessons learned from say, 100 years of sort of poor governance and worries about hyperinflation that have driven people to realize that even as volatile a store of value as Bitcoin is, it's yours. And there was an anecdote that a friend of mine tweeted just a week ago about how friends of his had gotten out of Venezuela with their wealth on thumb drive while gold was being confiscated from them. And these are the stories that we hear, particularly from the European continent and from South America, that have really kind of stuck with me. And I think it's something that we can take for granted here in the US, but keep in mind this is such a decentralized technology. So many of the people building it really are global. I mean, this is not just an American phenomenon. And I think for a lot of these people, it's a ticket to build something that is more stable and truly powerful. And it's going to be innovation that's not actually going to come from here in the US.
Thank you.